Hello, good evening. Evening again. I think we have a great opportunity here because we will try to speak about, not really just about journalism in framing conflicts, but how difficult it is, what we're going through, and not as a journalist, but as people trying to find a way to tell a story, which is very controversial and very complicated. So we have this great opportunity this night to discuss with Jeremy Bowen, who's the international editor from BBC, well-known person in this country and the world. Jeremy, thanks for being with us tonight. With Heba Saleh, who's the Cairo correspondent for Financial Times, but she knows the area very well, and she's from the area as well, and
covering Gaza.
And she's covering Gaza. And with Dalia Schendlin, I pronounced it the right way, and she's a fellow of Center International, but a columnist and a person that living in her country is trying to make a sense out of it as well. So thanks for being here tonight. Jeremy, let's start from really from deep inside. What does it mean being these days a war correspondent and having this, press written on a flak jacket? How is it changing? And
well, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been to many wars, and I've covered the Middle East, reported from the Middle East for many years, and places like Ukraine recently as well, in my job as international editor at the BBC. And I think it's changed enormously in many ways. I mean, the job hasn't changed insofar as being a journalist is the same. You have to get it right, you have to be on time, you've got to be accurate, you've got to be fair, you've got to be impartial. These are ideals. Not everybody succeeds, but it's an important thing. However, one way I think things have really changed in the more than 40 years now I've been doing it is that the media is much more front and center in terms of the way that conflicts are perceived, because we're the messenger that helps shape opinions. And since when, for example, there's an asymmetric war between the weak and the strong, the way that the progress of that war is perceived is often a result of the way it's reported. And so therefore people try to influence us, which fine, but then increasingly they try to stop us going to places. Gaza is a very good example. I've been in once since the war started there with the Israeli army. At the beginning, it was like 3 weeks in, and I went in on a trip with them into northern Gaza. It was already a wasteland after 3 weeks. And God knows what it's like now. But, the Israelis expedited our attendance as journalists at the border communities, the kibbutzim that were attacked on 7th of October last year. We were in some of them. We were in Kfar Aza when they were still shooting there. They were still fighting there. They were taking out the bodies of Israelis. There were dead Hamas guys all over the place. Why? Because they wanted us to see it. My conclusion is, why don't they let us into Gaza? It's because there's lots there they don't want us to see in terms of what they've done. So I think that being a journalist now is way more exposed because people are conscious of the media battlefield. And I think also sometimes that goes up to and including being killed. I don't think it's coincidental that so many Palestinian journalists have been killed in Gaza. So I think it's more dangerous. However, what I would say, last part of my remarks at this stage, I think it's as important as ever, if not more so, because there's a load of information now in the world. When I started in journalism, there was no internet. Just finding out basic facts was really difficult. Now there's a tsunami of facts. So actually, I think this is actually a good time, some people may not agree with this, to be part of the so-called mainstream media, which for some people is a sort of a swear word. But actually, I think it's good, because if you are trusted, there, and hopefully some people still trust us, and we're trying to gain other people's trust the whole time, then we can be a guide through that tsunami of information. So yeah, I think it's more important than ever to have active journalists.
Jeremy, thank you so much. And thanks also for these two aspects. On one hand, we have a big problem here, not being able to go and report from a place, which is a matter of big debates in our community. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, enhancing once again the role of mainstream media. After so many years that we were considered something that should disappear sooner or later, but having the chance of being someone who's reliable in a way.
That's the idea.
Is making sense. Yeah. So thank you so much. But Heba, your perspective is in some ways different, because you're reporting from the region, being from the region, and you give your perspective to a global audience, which is again different from what Jeremy was just saying.
Right. I want to start by paying tribute to the journalists who were killed in Gaza and the ones who are still working.
Yeah.
So being from the region helps a bit, but if you don't have access, you don't have access. And we look at a lot of what is produced by local journalists working in Gaza, the people who film inside hospitals, who show us the wounded being treated on the floor, who show us the destruction, who show us all this. We have to a certain extent rely on their work, but of course, journalism is a profession. You don't, it has standards. You don't take something from a source and just transmit it. You asked about being a local. Being a local helps with linguistic skills, understanding of the culture, understanding nuances, and it helps to care, but I don't want to overplay this. I mean, I think we have wonderful Western journalists who care and understand, and a lot of news organizations now have Arabic speakers, so don't really want to overplay this. What from the very beginning, what I wanted my contribution to be is to humanize the victims. My colleagues in Israel did a great job humanizing the victims in the kibbutzim that were attacked and the hostages, and they were able to visit their houses, to speak to their families, give all the little touches which turn them into people, the music they like to hear, the posters on their walls. We're not really able to do this for the Palestinians in the same way because we don't have access. I've been working on this with a Palestinian colleague who was there for a lot of the time, but she got out in October. And of course, you always have to remember that journalists there are in danger themselves and living in uncomfortable conditions and having to be displaced. And so that's another limitation. But I think the main task is to make the plight of victims relatable, do the best that we can do to portray their lives and portray the different sides of suffering, because also there's always this risk that people have had an overload of the suffering of the Palestinians. So we try to look at different angles, speak to different people, make them come to life. What else can I tell you? Yes, and then I mean, my main, one of the fears that I have, or one of the worries, is that there is a certain degree of normalization, again, of violence against Palestinians, against Arabs, against non-Europeans, and you have to constantly combat this by finding different angles, different aspects. Of course, you have to do all this while adhering to the highest editorial standards. You can't make up facts. You can't, I mean, just like I would cover any other story, the fact that I am Arab does not, I would cover it in exactly the same way.
And by the way, you're so right. There's a big risk out there to transform the lives and the suffering of the victims in numbers, or in the same pictures that make it horizontal. And so you don't go in depth. You don't fear you don't fear what they live and go through on a single day. And you just look at them from a side, and not being able to go into the place. It's a part of it. But Dalia, when it comes to you, you write analysis, you try to make columns that go in depth in the origin of the problems and the conflict we're going through, but in some ways, you report in a country and for a country that is part of the war. So I think that this has several implications, even on an ethical plan.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you also to ISPI for inviting us. I think that as a columnist, it's different from what correspondents do, and in some ways, there's a little more freedom to choose, but then also you don't necessarily know what to write about because you don't have to always go by the headlines. And so for me, the other thing about columnists is that we are expected ultimately to take a position, unlike journalists. And as a result, I came to this work in analysis and column writing very much from the perspective of what I consider to be my life's work, which is advancing peace at some level. That is my bias. But as a columnist, it's okay to have a bias, but you have to make the case. So I think when it comes to journalistic ethics, the danger of that, put it this way, given a big part of my job is to analyze the Israeli government. In general, they haven't been doing enough to advance peace. And so what I tend to do is be critical of the Israeli government for many years. And the danger, if I think about one of the challenges, is that it becomes a default. Everything the government does is wrong. Everything they say is wrong because I'm advancing an agenda that's not advancing, which is legitimate, but it can sometimes put you in a bit of a trap if you don't remember, wait a second, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're saying some things that are right. Even if I stick with my overall point, we have to acknowledge things that are not always comfortable for the agenda that I want to advance. So I have to take those things into account. And the reason is, ultimately, getting a message across as an analyst. I think I just
hear
need
it
to,
perfectly, or there's a problem?
I need to just face this way.
Because I can.
I think if I face forward, it sounds better. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, much better, because I'm afraid that.
I think it's okay if I face forward. Yeah, is that all right?
Is it okay now?
Okay.
Super.
The reason why I think it's important occasionally to make sure that you're checking the assumptions that you tend to repeat over and over again if you're thinking about making a point. You're repeating these assumptions, you assume the other side is wrong, but if you fail to take into account where you may be wrong as an analyst, or whether you have thought things for a long time that may have changed, the question is how effective you're going to be. If the idea is not only to convince people that I know are basically on my side, but actually to try to influence people who are maybe not in agreement with my basic agenda, you have to be able to acknowledge where the other side, and I mean by this, in this context, I mean, let's say the Israeli government, which I have been critical of for not doing enough to advance peace all these years, where certain elements of their arguments may be correct, you have to understand it, because otherwise you can't understand what Israel's doing. And for the credibility of speaking to audiences beyond the basic supporters for your message already. And that's, I think, a dilemma that I'm always thinking about. Who am I trying to talk to? And I think the second point that I would make is that for me, there's also a dilemma about language. I write mostly in English, means that my friends and colleagues can read it if they want to. But I also am Israeli, as you pointed out. I do write more in Hebrew, but mostly in English. And then I think, actually, that's sort of a political position in itself. The political position of writing in the wrong language, so to speak, is that I'm not really talking to my people. I'm not speaking in their language, which Israelis have always preferred to read in their native language, but more than ever, Israelis are looking inward, more than ever during this war. And the political position of writing in English is basically saying, I've given up on the Israeli public. Only the outside can have an influence. And I think there's a danger to that too. So I ask myself, at what point do I need to make the point that I want to make in the native language of the country, or one of the native languages of the country? And at what point, for which topics is it actually important to write it in English? Because I think the world needs to hear something that I'm trying to say, so that I can, not to overstate the importance of anything I've ever written, but sometimes you have a message that you think really is more important for the outside world to know, so that, the great hope is that somebody takes action or has better understanding of how to take action. But I think it is a serious dilemma, considering we are in a global community. Sometimes a message needs to be internal, but all conflicts, I think, are essentially very global at this point. So those are the kinds of challenges that I address.
Thank you. Thank you, Dalia, and thank you for sharing with us even your thoughts, your doubts, your considerations, because I think that what your newspaper is doing in this war, and this is totally personal, so that's just on me, what your newspaper is doing in this war, to me, looking from outside, sometimes even from inside, but mostly from outside, is quite important to find a balance, to find different opinion, to find something which is really different from a part of the mainstream in your country. But again, Jeremy, I think that we could share with our audience a little bit of the conversation we were just having a few minutes ago, while we were waiting to come here. Because, I think that most of us, what we're going through is the sense that in this hyperpolarized conflict and story and public opinions, it's almost impossible to do our job. I just share with you my little experience. I'm anchoring a program on Sunday, and what happens every single Sunday is that, and it's just a small example. If I start talking about Israel, and maybe I start talking about the 7th of October because I got a story, and for a bunch of minutes I use that story, I get insulted on the social media, I get insulted regularly. But what happens is that then I devote a long time speaking about Gaza, trying to figure out exactly what Heba was saying. I mean, the single stories, the personal perspective, and again, I get insulted because I'm doing that. So again, Jeremy, where's the way through?
Well, yes. If you report about the Middle East or from the Middle East, I'd say at the moment, more than any other story I can think of,
Well, I mean, I think impartiality is based on two main things, just an idea that I just got, but one of them has to be your personal honesty. I mean, are you open to the possibility that you might be making mistakes, or that somebody's telling you something that could be wrong or inaccurate or exaggerated? You have to constantly check yourself, and you have to be like honest with yourself. Just because it will look good on the page, it's powerful, doesn't mean it's true. That's one thing. But the other thing is professional standards. I mean, this is a job with standards. If you want to do it well, you have to be accurate, you have to examine your bias, you have to fact check. I mean, how else are you going to do it?
Knowing that at least you can try to be honest, and it's already a good start, by the way. And Dalia, just to finish with you, but let's leave on the side the reporting or what happened on the 7th of October. What has been the most difficult thing that you decided to write in the last? The most difficult thing you decided to write about in these last months? The most difficult topic you decided to write about?
I think that well, that's a hard question. Everything has been difficult because, put it this way, I can't put October 7th aside. The most difficult thing, number one.
I was not.
No, I didn't mean it like that, but I was going to say, the reason I can't put it aside is because I was abroad. I came back on the 10th. And I had to write something right away. And that was the hardest thing to write because I didn't know how to make sense of it. I'm an analyst. What is there to analyze? It was chaos. It was misery. The war was starting. I knew how the war was going to go. Not that I knew how long it was going to go and how bad, but I didn't know what I could possibly say. And the truth is, the first piece I wrote of the Israeli perspective, where our president had said, you know, we're just going to go ahead with this war and everybody in Gaza has some responsibility. And so I covered this little press conference, but it wasn't anything deep because I did not know what to make of the situation. I have to admit that. After that, I'm just thinking of some of the complicated pieces I've written. I'll give you two examples. One seems technical. I wrote a piece about the water crisis in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which turned out to be a pan-Palestinian water crisis. There are many complicated pieces I wrote, but that one was complicated because the way and the reasons why there is this water crisis are extremely complicated, and that is a metaphor for how the occupation has worked for all of these decades. Mechanisms that you can't see, bureaucracy that you can't untangle, based on agreements passed 30 years ago that nobody really understands, that were supposed to be temporary, and everybody can blame somebody else. And so I'm not saying this is the most important issue, but it is pretty important. You know, if you have enough water for a day that basically you or I would use if we flush the toilet once, it's a pretty desperate situation, but it was hard to capture all of that. So that was a complicated story. And I would say most recently, the most difficult story, well, two more examples maybe. I'll get to the most recent one after. Another very, very difficult one that really made me scared was when I tried to analyze how people are denying sexual violence. Because I'm, most of my life, again, critical of the Israeli perspective on a lot of things, but I feel like it was a matter of denying facts before exploring them, before actually listening to what happened. There were communities of people who had insisted that it's basically a fake, and I felt like that had to be analyzed for its own sake. Why is there a phenomenon of denialism? Then I also saw the same thing on the other side, not because I tried to, because I couldn't help but see that the Israeli side from early stage was in complete denialism and active denialism that there is starvation in Gaza. And it's the mechanisms of this denial that I think are very, very dangerous to our profession. I'm not making a political equivalency, but I can see this phenomenon going on. And trying to analyze that was very scary because you take on people who have a very strong interest, and I got attacked all over the social media, and you know, all of a sudden it's like I never wrote anything else but those two pieces and everybody attacked me for them.
That's a part of it.
And I think the last thing that was very, very hard for me to write personally was an article that I wrote not long ago exploring why I hear more people and voices in Israeli society questioning the appropriateness of the term genocide. I wanted to know who is saying it, Why are they saying it? What are the conversations they're having? I have to be honest, I did not write an op-ed saying in my voice, this is what it is. I've been covering, to some extent, analyzing the proceedings in the ICJ, and I have covered that because I think that international justice is a legitimate thing. I think that the courts are legitimate. It's going against the grain of Israeli society. I think the case is a legitimate case, and I'm waiting for the court to decide on it. But when it came to my observation that there are more people in Israel analyzing this, I wanted to put it out there and explain it, and that was just incredibly difficult to do.
So difficult, Jeremy, to use words in this time.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
Just to conclude.
just to conclude from my perspective, the most difficult thing about covering the war in Gaza is caused by the fact that even though we've got some fabulous Palestinian colleagues who are doing great work there, we work with trusted freelancers now because all of our staffers who were there wanted to get out. So we help them get out with their families. Most of them are in Qatar, not all. But despite the help we get from people on the inside in terms of filming, I feel strongly, and it's been one of my tools as a reporter of my whole career, that the best way to report a story is to be there yourself, to see it for yourself, to talk to people yourself, and not rely on what other people do. And not being able to do that, despite the fact we really try hard to cover what's the sheer horror of actually what's happened in Gaza. I was able to cover and report on the horror of what happened in Israel on the 7th of October, because I would talk to the people, survivors, I talked to families. I went there, I saw it for myself, I saw the bodies, I saw the damage. It was clear. I felt we did a good job on that. I don't think we can do as much of a good job as I'd like, because we can't get in there. And I think that if we could do a great deal to report the story. And I have this constant nagging sense, actually, I hate to say it, almost a failure, even though I know it's not our fault, for not being able to do that because of not being able to get in. It really bothers me, actually.
I totally share your feeling and thoughts. Thanks, Jeremy Bowen. Thanks, Heba Saleh, and thanks, Dalia Scheindlin. Thanks for sharing your. Thank you.